A humanoid robot just ran a half marathon faster than any human ever has. Meta quietly made what might be the most important robotics acquisition of the year. And over in China, 100 frozen robotaxis just forced Beijing to hit the brakes on the entire autonomous vehicle industry. It's May 9th, 2026. Let's make sense of the week in physical AI. From a team at the Synthetic Daily, it's Saturday, May 9th, 2026. Good to have you with us.
We went through 28 posts, articles, and threads across LinkedIn, Substack, and YouTube over the past week to dive deeper into the world of autonomous systems and robotics.
Okay, here's where it gets interesting. On April 19th, a humanoid robot called Lightning, built by Chinese smartphone company Honor, competing under the team name Monkey King, completed the Beijing E-Town Half Marathon in 50 minutes and 26 seconds. That's nearly 7 minutes faster than the human world record. Let that land for a second. A bipedal machine, navigating a pre-mapped course through real streets with real terrain and real turns, sustained a pace that no biological body has ever matched over 13.1 miles.
The immediate reaction from a lot of engineers was, well, sure, a machine doesn't get lactic acid buildup. It doesn't hit the wall at mile 10. Fair point. But what's actually impressive here isn't the speed. It's the balance, the endurance of the actuators, the navigation over an uncontrolled course for nearly an hour straight. It wasn't flawless. Lightning crashed into a barricade during the race and had to be righted by handlers before continuing. But completing the distance at that pace is still a remarkable hardware demonstration. 2 years ago, humanoid robots were still stumbling on flat warehouse floors. The gap between can walk and can run a half marathon on city streets is enormous in terms of control systems, battery management, and real-time perception.
This matters commercially because the half marathon is essentially a torture test for everything that matters in industrial deployment: sustained operation, thermal management, robust locomotion over varied surfaces. If your robot can do this, it can probably handle an 8-hour shift in a logistics facility. And that's exactly where the money is heading. So let's start with the big story. On May 1st, Meta Platforms acquired a startup called Assured Robot Intelligence. Not a lot of fanfare, no big press conference, no Zuckerberg video. But if you understand what Meta is actually building here, this might be the most consequential robotics deal of the year.
Assured Robot Intelligence builds AI models that help robots understand, predict, and adapt to human behaviors in complex environments. The co-founders, Laurel Pinto and Xiaolong Wang, are now inside Meta's superintelligence labs. And the strategic read from analysts at Tech Fast Forward and others is that Meta is running the Android playbook. They don't want to build the humanoid hardware. They want to own the intelligence layer, the operating system that every manufacturer plugs into.
Think about what that means. If NVIDIA is building the GPU substrate and the simulation tools, and various Chinese and American companies are building the physical bodies, Meta wants to be the brain that runs on all of them. Goldman Sachs projects the humanoid robot market at $38 billion by 2035. Morgan Stanley says $5 trillion by 2050. Meta isn't chasing today's revenue here. They're placing a bet that whoever controls the intelligence middleware for physical AI will have the same kind of platform power that Google has with Android on phones.
The interesting wrinkle is that Meta is also the company behind Llama, their open-weight language models. So the question becomes, will they open-source the robot intelligence layer too, or will this be the thing they keep proprietary? That decision will shape whether the humanoid industry ends up consolidated or fragmented.
On March 31st, something went very wrong in Wuhan, China. Over 100 of Baidu's Apollo Go robotaxis simultaneously froze in the middle of city streets. Vehicles stalled on overpasses, on elevated roads, in intersections. Passengers were trapped inside for up to 2 hours. Picture that. You're in a car with no driver, and it just stops. No one comes. The doors might not open. You're stuck on an overpass in traffic.
Frightening. Beijing's response was swift and dramatic. A nationwide suspension of all new autonomous driving permits. Every company, every city, full stop. Fortune reported this week that China essentially hit the emergency brake on an industry that was supposed to be one of its crown jewels.
Contrast that with the United States, where there is still no federal autonomous vehicle safety law. The Bipartisan Self-Drive Act of 2026 exists as a draft, but it hasn't passed. Tesla just expanded its robotaxi service to Dallas and Houston. Elon Musk says he wants unsupervised vehicles in a dozen states by year's end. Uber announced a luxury robotaxi partnership with Lucid Motors, Nuro, and now Hertz for fleet management. With an expanded commitment, now totaling 35,000 vehicles, including 10,000 Lucid Gravity SUVs and 25,000 from a forthcoming mid-size platform, targeting San Francisco by late 2026.
So you've got two completely different regulatory philosophies playing out in real time. China saw a mass failure and shut everything down. America sees individual incidents and keeps expanding. Neither approach is obviously right. As Marketplace's own reporting noted this week, there's a social zero-tolerance bar for autonomous vehicle fatalities that doesn't exist for human drivers, even though human drivers kill 40,000 Americans a year. The question isn't whether robotaxis will work. It's whether any society will tolerate the inevitable failures along the way.
Let me bring up something related. Azeem Azhar of Exponential View spent the past week in China meeting AI teams, and the numbers he brought back are staggering. Zhipu, one of China's two publicly listed foundation model companies, is serving 5.5 trillion tokens per day. Developers are joining the platform at a rate of about 10 per minute. That's not hype. That's infrastructure strain.
Azhar reports that every team he spoke with, Zhipu, Minimax, Kimi, Alibaba, Xiaomi, ByteDance, acknowledge compute constraints, particularly the NVIDIA chip shortage driven by export controls. But here's the telling detail. When asked what model they personally prefer for technical work, Chinese AI researchers said Anthropic's Claude. They're using Western models as their personal tools while building their own platforms for deployment. Azhar calls it dogfooding. They use their own models publicly but reach for Claude when they need the best tool available.
Morgan Stanley research published this week argues that China's humanoid robotics lead, combined with its EV supply chains and massive industrial robotics base, will expand its share of global export market share to 16.5% by 2030. The playbook is the same one China ran with electric vehicles. Invest heavily in the supply chain, accept losses early, scale aggressively, then dominate exports. The difference is that this time the product doesn't just drive itself. It walks, picks things up, and learns on the job. There's another angle worth talking about. SWYX, Sean Wang, over at Latent Space, has been running a fascinating series on world models, and this week the thread pulled together in a way that connects directly to everything we've been discussing. The roster of players now includes NVIDIA with Cosmos, Google with Genie 3, Yann LeCun's billion-dollar AMI initiative, and his published Le World model, plus Waymo, Tesla, and a string of startups like World Labs with Fei-Fei, Li, and General Intuition.
A world model, if you're not steeped in this, it's essentially an AI's internal simulation of how the physical world works. Not just recognizing objects in an image, but predicting what happens next. If I push this cup, it falls. If this car turns left, it'll hit that wall. For robotics and autonomous vehicles, world models are the bridge between language understanding and physical competence.
What's striking about Applied Intuition's perspective, that's the $15 billion physical AI company that Kazar Younis and Peter Ludwig built, is their argument that the bottleneck is no longer model intelligence. The models are smart enough. The bottleneck is deployment onto constrained hardware. Getting a world model that runs on a Jetson chip inside a moving truck in real time, not on a data center GPU with unlimited power. Their framing is that the future of autonomy looks less like one-off demos and more like Android for every moving machine, which, notably, is the exact same metaphor Meta is using for humanoid intelligence. When two very different companies reach for the same analogy independently, it usually means they're seeing the same structural opportunity. Let's end with something more immediately practical. Daniel Jindu published a deep dive video this week on Agent Zero, also called Agent Zero, one of the rawest AI agent tools available right now. The pitch is seductive. You pull a Docker container, and inside it is a full Linux computer. Terminal, browser, file system, everything. You point a large language model at it and say figure it out. It doesn't come with pre-built integrations. It writes its own tools on the fly. Need a web scraper? It builds one. CSV processing? It writes the script. Fastest time from zero to first output of anything in its class.
Jindu lays out the catches, and they're serious. There's a documented CV, that's CV 2026-4307, a path traversal vulnerability. The agent runs as root inside Docker by default. Credentials can leak in plain text into log files. As Jindu puts it, it's like having a broken lock on your filing cabinet. There's also a memory corruption problem. It stores state in a database but fails to retrieve it reliably, leading operators to do weekly resets.
And then there's the funding model. Agent Zero is backed by a crypto token called A0T on the base network. That's a fundamentally different incentive structure than venture-backed or open-source community-backed tools. When your funding comes from token holders, your roadmap answers to different masters than when it comes from enterprise customers demanding security patches.
The broader lesson here is one the AI agent ecosystem is learning the hard way. Speed without security is a liability. The enterprise buyers showing up with real budgets in 2026 aren't impressed by fastest to first output. They're asking about CVs, about credential management, about state reliability. The tools that win the next 12 months will be the ones that figure out how to be both fast and safe.
All right, let's zoom out and talk about the bigger picture. What are the main themes running through everything we covered today? The first big theme is the Android metaphor wars. Multiple companies, Meta for robot intelligence, Applied Intuition for vehicle autonomy, NVIDIA for physical AI infrastructure, are all racing to become the dominant platform layer, and whoever wins the Android of physical AI framing will set the terms for an entire hardware ecosystem.
Next, regulatory divergence as competitive weapon. China and America's opposite responses to autonomous vehicle failures are creating two distinct innovation environments that will produce fundamentally different safety cultures, deployment timelines, and public trust dynamics.
Next, the dexterity gap. Despite headline-grabbing marathon runs and factory deployments, Bloomberg's reporting reminds us that replicating the human hand remains the hardest unsolved problem in robotics. The gap between locomotion and manipulation is where billions in R&D will be spent next.
And the last one, security as the agent ecosystem's bottleneck. The AI agent gold rush is producing tools optimized for developer excitement rather than enterprise trust, and the market will bifurcate between tinkerer toys and production-grade platforms based entirely on security posture. So if you're going to take away a few things from today's episode, here's what I'd remember.
Number 1. The companies that will dominate physical AI aren't building robots. They're building the intelligence layer that every robot manufacturer will depend on, and that platform war is already underway.
Number 2. China's chip shortage isn't slowing its AI ambitions. It's forcing a different kind of innovation under constraint, and their researchers are quietly using Western models as personal productivity tools while building sovereign alternatives.
Number 3. In the AI agent market, the gap between impressive demo and enterprise-ready tool is almost entirely a security and reliability gap, not an intelligence gap.
And finally, The robotaxi industry's biggest risk isn't technical failure. It's that society applies a zero-tolerance standard to machine errors that it would never apply to human drivers.
That's the Synthetic Daily for today. All the sources and links are on the website if you want to dig deeper.
Thanks for listening. See you tomorrow.
Everybody dancing,